Yesterday I saw online Coogan had done a great interview with your dad. They're always fascinating insights into boxing, business generally, and life. You know, your dad sort of exudes knowledge, doesn't he, when he talks. It must be nigh on impossible to be around someone like your dad and not constantly be picking stuff up.
Yeah, I did a lot of that in my early years. Again, no sob story, but my dad was away a hell of a lot when I was young, and when he was back, he was working. So I was around him in the office, whether it be home or in Romford. After school, I'd always go to the gym in Romford and be around fighters and be around him. So I picked a lot up subconsciously over the years. But he's probably one of his best assets is his ability to stay calm, and nothing's ever really a drama. And if you go to him with a problem, when you start out promoting and a fight falls through, it's the worst feeling in the world. I mean, you don't know what to do, especially in the age of social media, where people have got access to you to moan and this kind of stuff. But now it's just another thing that happens. You get every show, you get 4 or 5 fights for it. It's how you think on your feet. It's how you come up with a strategy to overcome these problems, and he's very good at that. And he's always there for me, for advice. He's got a lot of long-standing contacts in the game with governing bodies and broadcasters. But things change as well, and just because he was doing things right in boxing 20 years ago, those things don't have to be right now. When I came along, social media is probably one of the most important facets of my promoting. People just laughed at me, other promoters. Well, all he does is he's on that Twitter, and now you look at them on it, it's like they're on it non-stop. So I think one of my strongest points is the fact that I am younger, and I do understand what people nowadays want rather than potentially what people wanted 20 years ago. He'll always be a brilliant pillar of advice, and he's a genius, really. So he's great to have, but it's not, it's about, I'll come up with ideas now and he'll go, oh, I don't know about that. When we were doing it, we were giving flyers out on the streets, so well, that doesn't really, why would I want to do that when I can hit 250,000 people on a mobile phone like that, So it's, things change, but he's a well of knowledge.
And does that, that's interesting when you compare the eras there in terms of how you disseminate fights and how you get the message out there. Do you think then back in the day it sort of highlights your dad's achievements even more because it's probably harder to work back then and spread the message with so fewer mediums to do so?
Yeah, I think so. Social media has its its benefits and it has its advantages and its disadvantages. The disadvantages are that everyone's got access to you. So, you could leave a show on a Saturday night and you could go, oh, what a great show that was. But then you go on Twitter and people are going, well, actually, I didn't like that, and that fight was actually shit, and what you do? You think, wow. But then, if you didn't have that, you just go home and be happy and have your Sunday lunch and not, worry about anything. But the advantages are you have access to these people. So if I want to give you some news about what we're up to or a new fight, I can do it in a heartbeat, into your hand. And I think that the days of, and I liken this to, boxing news, who has a readership of, I don't know, say 10,000, and they want to charge you whatever for a page advert, which could go to 10,000 people, but I could send the same advert to 150,000 people or more in a click of a button for free. You know what I mean? So things change, and we support the boxing news because they're a trade magazine. They're very important to the game. But things that used to be traditional, fly posting, giving out leaflets. These are dinosaur tricks that don't necessarily work. I don't rule them out completely, but there's new ways now to promote, and I think the key to our success has been embracing the new age, particularly of social media.
And sort of talking about Twitter, what would be the most random proposition you've ever received on Twitter? Just come to my head that question.
I'm not sure about proposition, but that
wasn't from Coogan.
Yeah, but you get all sorts. It's frustrating because a lot of the time you feel as though you're doing the right thing, you're making the right decisions, and people who don't really understand the business and the dynamics of the sport, that's probably the most frustrating thing. You know, I think, I'd call it frustrating more than anything, because you want to take the time to explain to people who are wrong why they're wrong, but in so many characters it's very difficult, and without going back and back and back and back and back, it's difficult to do.
Have you ever felt the need, has someone ever kind of struck a chord with you whereby you've said, I need to send this person an email on the back of this?
No, I say to people, phone me in the office. I've had, there's been half a dozen times I've said, listen, I can't talk to you on here because I really want to explain. Phone me in the office, this is the number.
Yeah.
And they never phone. Right. So, and that's a frustrating thing, because Twitter's a great way to hide behind, you know, I mean, you look at some people just abusing people all day. They'd never do it to anyone's face, but sometimes you say, look, phone the office because I want to talk to you about this because you're wrong.
Yeah.
You know, but unfortunately I never do.
No. I was going to ask, sort of moving on to the Matchroom stable of fighters, you seemingly sign like another elite fighter every few weeks, month or so. So you've got an ever-expanding roster now. I know I've heard you in the past say that you have a kind of number cap in mind where you'd probably stop. But does it sort of get to the point where you think that you're going to continually expand your staff to accommodate more and more fighters?
Yeah, it's not necessarily the staff, it's more about the dates and the opportunities. You know, we're putting stuff together at the moment where we're probably going to be running a series of non-televised shows as well, or streamed shows, that will help us advance not necessarily the lower level fighters, but fighters who aren't in you know, bigger fights or appealing fights, who say might be coming back for an injury or a layoff, or you know, because there's half a dozen fighters that I'm talking to at the moment I'd love to sign, but I'm not necessarily able to, because it'll affect the opportunities for my current client base. So in answer to your question, we're looking at ways in which we can keep expanding our team, because there's fighters who I believe can go on to achieve great things, and I'm looking now at, of course, fighters with great pedigree and great amateur pedigree and medals in this and medals in that, but also ones that I believe might have something a little bit different, who might shock you when I sign, you know, and think, wow, he signed him, it's a strange one. But just, you know, it's not just about handpicking I mean, because, you know, and not meaning to sound big-headed, but pretty much I believe the majority of fighters in the UK, given the choice, would like to be with us. But our immediate choice of fighters is the ones, if they're debuting, with the pedigree, Olympic gold medalists, well, you know, GB honours, all this kind of stuff. And again, if it's the more elite fighters, it's perhaps one that have won British, European titles, or ready to challenge for a world title. But what about the other ones? The ones who have got the ability, but perhaps haven't been given the chance. So I want to unearth a few gems, that's what I'm saying. And I think this new model of non-televised shows will allow me to do that.
Yeah. That kind of neatly segues onto a question I wanted to ask you,
see
actually.
How I did that?
Yeah, so you
very
did
good.
Completely inadvertent there, that's nice. Right, I mean, I also cover mixed martial arts, so I watch a lot of UFC fights. I've heard you state in the past that you don't really pay that close attention to mixed martial arts or the Ultimate Fighting Championships, but I have sort of drawn parallels in how certain things, how you approach things. Like there, you've alluded to potentially streaming fights. The UFC recently introduced what they call Fight Pass, which is an online platform.
Okay, I'll be copying that.
Right, whereby they, you know, like you said there, maybe some of the lesser cards or the cards with the not the marquee names on, people can watch online. Also, the way that you've embraced social media, as you alluded to during this interview, very similar to how Dana White really kind of plugs social media. I think he even holds summits for the fighters and gives out bonuses for who uses Twitter most effectively. So I do think the way that this kind of very modern fashion in which you're approaching the game is kind of similar, but you've gone on record as stating that you don't really follow that closely, do you?
No, I don't at all. And I think you know, Dana White, perhaps there's similarities between the way that I and Dana White promote rather than the sports itself. I mean, and you know, the profiles, the crowds, you know, I think that when I went to America about 2-3 years ago, I watched, you'll know this more than me, Lesnar against Carwin or Darwin or something like that. It was massive.
Yeah.
And that was on a Friday night at the Mandalay Bay. and it was like, I couldn't believe the profile of I mean, everyone was about my age. I was probably 26, 27, and younger.
Yeah.
Everyone was doled up to the nines. Everyone was drinking. Everyone was there to party. Everyone wanted to go out after. Everyone looked like they had a few quid in their pocket.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, this is interesting. The next night, I went to a fight at the Mandalay Bay. And it was full of 20-stone Mexicans sitting there having a hot dog and those big pint things with like a t-shirt and like old jeans on. I was thinking, wow, this is totally, you know, and one thing that I want to, you know, very important to me in boxing is that it has to be a night out. It has to be cool to go to a show. You know, not what you're doing, you're going to boxing. Boxing, who goes to boxing? You know, and that's what we've done with darts. You know, and people look at darts and go, how on earth have they done that? 7, 8, 9, 10, 11,000 people every week in arenas up and down the country. Because it's cool to go to darts, because it's a great night out, because it's value for money. And they're all things, but with boxing, the difference you've got between, say, boxing and darts is, you've got, in my opinion, one of the greatest sports of all in boxing. So you've got the product. All you need to do is put great fights on and make it fun, make it cool. So that people, when people go to boxing, they go, fucking, this is great. You know, music, women. You know, not women in a ring. I'm talking about women in the audience. This is what's happening in darts because, you know, it's become cool. And perhaps the similarities between the way that myself and Dana White go about it, maybe that's the similarities. But I don't necessarily feel it's the same audience. Someone tweeted me the other day and said, "Oh, the UFC's coming to Dublin, so that'll be a good example of a gauge of the." You know, I said, "No, I disagree." You know, I think UFC have got the brand, and perhaps Matchroom have got the brand in boxing in the UK that a UFC have got, because not all MMA works. You know, and you've got all kinds. I mean, you'll know more than me, but you've got cage rages and, like, you know, loads of different types of, well, not types, but brands of MMA. But UFC is the one, isn't it? I mean, that's the one that people want to go to. So I think the similarities might be in the approach rather than the audiences and the actual, you know, similarities from a business sense.
And you touched upon it there with the kind of younger demographic in terms of the audience as well. You know, obviously the way you've embraced social media, that's facilitated that as well, maybe bringing in slightly younger audiences as well. But also what I've sort of found fascinating is that you've, you know, along this journey, you've also had the guiding principle that there needs to still be some sort of fairness in the game. So, for example, with the Beltran and Burns fight, and then obviously the controversial Froch Groves, you know, you publicly wanted to make those fights after they happened because, you know, so even though you are appealing to the younger audience, you still have those guiding principles there to drive your business.
People can't get disillusioned with the sport, and that can happen if, you know, I mean, another going at social media, sometimes you get bad decisions. You know, and Burns Beltran was a bad decision. You know, to give the fight a draw, it's like you could have an argument about it, but it's a weak argument. For someone to score that fight for Ricky Burns, like they did, was just miles away. I mean, you know, and you can't, there's no point me trying to justify that or say, well, you know, it was wrong. So, and so many people are watching it that if you try and pretend it was wrong, you just make yourself look like an arse anyway. So I try and speak how I feel. Not everyone will agree with that because it's opinion. You know, not everyone will agree with my opinion all the time, but I'm a fight fan as well, but I'm driven by demand. You know, demand by fans and demand by broadcasters ultimately. And when that fight finished, all the fans and all the broadcasters wanted to see the rematch. Same with Froch Groves. So it's not just, I'd love to sit here and say, well, I'm such a great guy, I will just want to do what's fair and make these rematches because it's what's right. It's no, that's where the money is and that's what people want, therefore I'm going to make it. So, you know, I'm just doing really the right thing from a business sense and you know, from an ethics point of view as well. Yeah, I felt that Beltran deserved a rematch, and yeah, I felt that Groves was stopped a little bit too early. So, but ultimately, if that fight, if Burns Beltran was a total stinker and no one wanted to see it again, I wouldn't be trying to make it out of the goodness of my own heart.
I admire your honesty there.